All right, in this video, we're going to go over absolute and relative URL file paths. So that's going to skip to that slide here. In the previous video, we talked about file structure and best practices. And so you should have your project folder set up. This is what we went over in the last video, where we have the CSS directory, this IMG directory. Then we created this file and we gave it the extension .html. And so what we're going to talk about today is this idea of how to reference certain files within your project folder. So for instance, if I wanted to reference this CSS file, how would I appropriately do that? And so let's dig into that, and then we'll jump back into Visual Studio Code here in just a second. Let me say a few words about file paths and why it's important. So here you have this graphic, and let me just say a few things here. So you have this computer screen here, and what this represents is that you're going to develop your website locally, right, on your machine, on your computer. You're going to create this folder structure. You're going to have an index.html file. You may have an images folder that holds the cat image that you can display on your website. But then once you are done developing your website on your computer, you're going to want to then publish your site to the World Wide Web. You would need to move that over to a server so that it'll be visible to all your friends and family and whoever wants to see your website. The big thing here is that this folder structure that we create on our local machine, we want to make sure that it's properly referencing the files from the actual web folder that we structured here on our local machine. And so if those file paths are incorrect, it's not going to render correctly on this server. And so this absolute versus relative file path and correctly structuring out a relative file paths is extremely important. So let's talk about how to do this. What I'm going to do here is jump back to our site here, and I'm going to just create an HTML document here. And here, and like I said, you may not understand everything that's going on here. We're going to talk about this next week, this whole, all these different tags here. But for now, just kind of go ahead and, I'm more so seek to understand what is happening here. I'm going to put a link tag here. All right, I want to save that. And so here we have this index.html file. And what I want to do is I want to link in this style sheet that's located within this CSS directory. And what I would need to do here is provide what we call the relative file path. And the relative file path to that resource would be, from the index.html file, would be CSS/style.css. And that will properly reference the style.css document into my index.html. And so let's talk more about what I just did here. All right, so let me save that, and let's jump back to our lecture notes here. All right, so on this slide here, we have absolute and relative file paths. The absolute file path is going to start from the root folder, right? In our class, we're going to use nothing but relative file paths. And a relative file path is a path that is expressed from the current document, right? So if we jump back to our editor here, you'll see that the current document is index.html, but then how will we go and retrieve style.css? We would need to go and say CSS and then style.css, because essentially what you're telling the computer is where to locate the resource. And that's going to be from the current document, right? So here's a quick activity that I want us to work through. If you click on this button here, click here for worksheet. We're gonna walk through this activity together here. But before I do that, let me just say a few things here about file path location. You will see within file paths there's the / and so this picture doesn't do a really. It's not a good example. On your machine, you have these backslashes. But when we're doing our website development, we're gonna do /. More to come on that. So the forward slash means the current root, means the root of the current drive. ./ just basically means the current directory. And then here, the one that's I think a lot of students have a hard time understanding is this ./ Basically, that means backing up a directory or going to the parent of the current directory. So for example, if you were in the phys folder and you said ./ that would back you up to the bacon directory. The parent of phys is going to be bacon, right? And so this worksheet here is going to help us understand this a little bit better here. So go ahead and click on that worksheet. It's going to look like this here. So here's our folder structure that we've created. The root folder, let's assume that the root folder is our web project. And we want to basically give the relative file path for each of these particular files here. So from index.html, we want to basically retrieve the bg.jpg file. So go ahead and pause this video, and I'll do the first one here, and I want you to see if you can go ahead and do 2 through 5 here. So let's do the first one here. So the relative file path from the index.html file to the bg.jpg file, if we just use our mouse here and we trace this out, right, it's going to be img/bg.jpg. What I'm going to do here is pull up Notepad here. I'm going to write that out here. So let's do this. So for number 1 here, just what the file path would be, it would be img/bg.jpg. So go ahead and take a stab at seeing if you can accomplish 2 through 5. I would say 5 is going to probably give you the most difficulty here, but we're going to walk through it together here. So go ahead and take a stab at it and see if you can actually go ahead and knock out those relative file paths. All right, so let's actually jump back into it here. So number 2, what is the relative file path to logo.png from index.html? And so here we have index.html. To get to logo, we're going to say img/logo.png. Number 3, how do we reference minimize.js from index.html? Like I said, these are pretty straightforward. So here from index.html, we're going to say JS, right? And I'll just use my mouse here and just trace it out. There's the JS folder. And then we get to minimize.js. Number 4, it's going to be how do we reference style.css from index.html. And so we just did an example of that within our code here, right? And so let's jump back to our sheet here and give the relative file path. It's going to be css/style.css. And the last one, like I said, it's going to give you, it's going to give you a little bit of a challenge here. It's going to say, how do we reference style.css from the index.html? I'm sorry, how do we reference banner.jpg from contact.html? And you'll see that contact.html is located within a directory called pages, and we need to retrieve the style.css document. And if you remember from the previous slide here, that means we need to jump back to the parent directory and then go retrieve the resource. So watch what I'm going to do here. So we're in the pages. What I need to do is get out of the pages and get back into the root so that I can successfully reference the style.css. So the relative file path for number 5 is going to be ... Then we're going to say CSS, right? And then we're going to say style.css. And that would be the relative file path to reference. Whoops, I'm sorry. We're not referencing the style.css. We're referencing banner. We need to go and do img / we need to go into the home _img / and then banner.jpg. And so that would be the relative file path for number 5. In class, I always get the question, couldn't you use //? Yes, that is true. You could have used //. So if you did this here, you would have been a little bit, that is also correct. So this is more formal to do it this way, // because the // just means the current directory. And that would be the answers for 1 through 5 there. If you have any questions about that, feel free to shoot me an email and we can go over it. But that's essentially the relative file path from the current document. All right, let's say a few things here. So here's an activity that I want you to work on. We're going to review this together, and I'll post this to my GitHub account so you can have access to this. But essentially, go ahead and complete the first 5 steps. One, it says create a new web project. So what is the first thing you want to do? You want to create a folder, right? Open that folder within your text editor. You're going to basically create this hierarchical folder structure. You're going to create a file called index.html file within the root, and then you're going to download a popular image logo and save it to your project folder. And then I want you to give the relative file path to reference that image. Save the file, and then I want you to render it in the browser. So take a step at doing that. We're going to go over that when we in person, when we meet in class here. But take a stab at trying to accomplish this activity. And this is what we'll review in class here. All right. And just a point of clarification, you're going to give that relative file path. So once you're going to copy this code, and you could copy the code right here from the slide. But then once you have this code copied and saved into your document, you're going to give the relative file path here between the opening and closing quotation mark. These are called attributes. We're going to talk more about attributes next week. But to give the relative file path or reference an image into your project folder, into your file, you would give the relative file path. So for instance, if I downloaded an image from the internet and I placed that image inside of a images folder, it would be, and the name of the file was logo.png. That would be the relative file path. All right. So just a point of clarification, this is where you're going to give the relative file path for number 4.